Hey, if you're listening to this on audio, do not fast forward. This is an intro, not an advertisement. I got to tell you something. At the end of this show, I got an interview with a lady named Lenore Skenazy. Very fun. I really like talking to her. She was the author of Free Range Kids. At one point, she was named the worst mom in America. I think my mom maybe had her edged out. Probably Casey Anthony as well. But basically, what she did was she let her 8-year-old son or 9-year-old son ride the subway. We talk about that. We talk about how the recommendations that the MTA gives is 8 years old. We talk about the entire Let Grow movement of giving kids a little more space to breathe, getting rid of helicopter parenting. That's kind of what the whole interview is about. She's actually great. Give her organization Let Grow a follow on Twitter. It's Let Grow org. But yeah, it was really fun. This was a great episode of the show. Had a good time with the guys, and then at the end, you'll hear the full audio of this interview. It was really definitely a good time. Like I said, check it out. And if you're watching on YouTube, and that'll be just this interview on YouTube, click that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Go check out Lenore's videos. Do all of that. Also follow me on Twitter at Chris from BKLYN. All right, guys, let's get into it.
Society Radio presents a Chris from Brooklyn bonus content fun time. Here's your host, Chris from Brooklyn.
All right, guys, I'm talking to Lenore Skenazy. She is the founder of Free Range Kids movement, I suppose.
That's it.
The former worst mom in America. I feel like there's probably been some people who beat you out since.
Excuse me. No, there haven't. I would like you to prove those words. That's fighting words with me. I am the worst mom in America.
Well, I mean, the main thing was the funniest thing. So for people who don't know, you kind of, this whole Free Range Kids movement started when you let your 9-year-old son ride the subway by himself, and you wrote a column about it in the news, in the Daily News, correct?
No, actually, by that time, I had lost my Daily News job. After 14 wonderful years, one day these things end, and I was at the New York Sun, and that's where I wrote it. Yeah.
And so the big backlash about that, but the MTA says, obviously whoever wrote the recommendations on the MTA's website says that no children under 8 be unaccompanied on the subway. And I was on the subway. I'm probably 12, 11 years old. And it was just, there was this massive backlash against you. I mean, well, you did kind of play it out a book about it, but that
was a year later. Yeah.
But for me, what was kind of your with the column and with letting your son?
What was the point? That's what I'm getting. The point was this. It wasn't my idea. It was our son's idea. We have an older son who didn't ask to go on the subway at age 9. He calls himself the control group. And we felt, my husband and I, America's Worst Dad, that if he was asking that he wanted to do this, we should think about it seriously. And we decided that it made sense because he could speak the language. He could read a map. That's how we get around New York all the time. He's 9 years old. That meant 9 years of experience on the subway. And it meant an entire lifetime of experience for us where we saw that it was crowded, which means safe, and that it was just a normal way to get around. It's not the bowels of hell. Well, it is the bowels, but not of hell. And let's skip that. I mean, bowels or not, it's pretty darn safe down there. It's not always that pleasant. And it was not something that difficult. And I think that the reason it was so resonant for people around the country is that most people don't live in New York City. And so if you think about the subways, it's a very foreign concept. You know, hell is supposed to be below the surface. And also there are a lot of movies that end up with, very exciting chases with people and monsters and guns and aliens and you name it, stuff made out of slime down there. And all we're dealing with are, commuters. And it was a Sunday, so it wasn't even commuters. It was just Sunday traffic on the subways.
Yeah. And this is what neighborhood is where it's even like something to worry about, if you mind my asking.
No, to me, it was an extremely safe neighborhood. I dropped him off at Bloomingdale's, which is the super fancy department store.
Oh, by Central.
But not too far from Central Park. It's at 59th Street. Yeah, you can walk over to Central Park. You can walk to the East River. If you feel like going to New York Hospital, you're nearby. I mean, there's Hunter College, not too far away. So a very, I'd say, super touristy neighborhood where there's a lot of good food. I mean, there was just sort of a nice Manhattan neighborhood. And what he was taking it down to was 34th Street, which we all know from a certain movie, Miracle there. And then he had to take a bus across town because we lived in a slightly obscure part of Manhattan, like on some landfill, really. So it was a 2-part trip, and all of it, I thought, pretty darn safe. I mean, if I love safety, this is what I've been trying to explain for the rest of my life, is that I don't believe in taking crazy risks. I'm very scared of cars, and I don't want anything untoward to happen to anybody, much less my progeny. So I just thought that it was safe enough and that he was perfectly capable of doing this. And I didn't even write about it after he had done it for like another month and a half, because it was just a family experience. It wasn't meant for public consumption. It wasn't done as a publicity stunt. It was just done as, this is something that he's ready to do. Would you write about, your kid learning how to roller skate? Probably not, unless you had a deadline and nothing to write about that day. And then you'd say, should I write about the subway ride? And your editor says, sure, local story, why not? And then it took off. I'm going to take a sip too. Cheers.
What I was going to say is, in the interim between writing about it, you must have been this is a weird thing, because when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, I'm in my late 30s.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, like, literally, I got rid of my grandmother. So it was kind of just like, you go outside. She would let us watch cartoons. It was like, okay, cartoons are over. You go outside, and I don't want to see you until dinner time. And it was fine. There was never really much of an issue. No one abducted. There was nothing. And we lived in an incredibly unsafe neighborhood. I lived in Gowanus, and I lived in Gowanus in the 90s, and it was an unsafe neighborhood, but it was just like, not during, I mean, even if it was unsafe during the day, but it was like her kids grew up in that neighborhood. Nothing happened. She had 7 of them.
Wow.
And it's just kind of, it has been this thing. And this is 2008, you write the article, and all this has been going on. And just a few years ago, you had to start letgrow.org. And it's because after 10 years of beating the drum on this, and you teamed up with Jonathan Haidt. Right. I kind of was refamiliarized with your work. I read The Coddling
of the American Mind. Excellent book. Yes.
Yeah, I read that.
Usually I hold it up. Right.
Yeah. I saw your reason piece that was. And it is a funny thing, because these helicopter parented children are reaching college age. But so after 10 years, people nodding along with you, you start an organization. And you guys are getting into schools, which is an interesting thing. And I'm just kind of curious with because in your book, I refreshed myself on your book.
Good for
you. You talk about just like the fear of litigation by educators. So I was wondering what the uphill battle was to get to get into
schools.
Yeah.
Well, the uphill battle in schools is simply letting people know about us, much more than any fear of litigation. For what we propose, one of our sort of, marquee initiatives, and it's free. That's the great thing about it, is called the Let Grow Project. And as you say, Let Grow was founded after Free Range Kids. I loved Free Range Kids, but as I lectured around the country explaining why are we so afraid for our kids, we all remember, if it's not the Gowanus Canal, we remember getting on our bikes or walking to school, or games after school of kickball or stickball, whatever it was, something that rhymes. And we appreciated that time as kids. And I would get people to remember that, and yet they would say they couldn't do the same thing for their own kids, even though they loved their memories of it, and they felt that time was foundational. They felt that they really got something out of the friendship, sometimes the risks, the fun, the building of the forts, the cops and robbers. And so I realized that simply people agreeing with the idea that it's not good to stunt kids, to treat them, as if they're bonsai trees, people would agree with that, but it was still impossible for them to say, okay, kids, take the subway, ride your bikes, because often there were no other people doing that, so you felt a little crazy. There was no kids for your kids to play with in the park, because everybody else was inside, or they were on the electronics, or they were at, lacrosse practice. And it was becoming, even once in a while, you'd hear from me, generally, stories about parents who had Child Protective Services called on them simply for letting their kids walk home from the park or play on the playground without them. And so I realized that you have to re-normalize it as a group, almost, of letting your kids play outside for it to become regular again. And you can't just expect people to make this leap unless there's a little push. And I read this fantastic quote that I think is really true, which is more people change their minds after changing their behavior than change their behavior after changing their minds. So I'd been changing minds and the behavior was stuck. And so Let Grow was trying to come up with ways of making it normal, easy, and even a little push to get parents to let go, because once they would do that, everything changed, because they were so proud of their kid doing something on his own, coming home with the bread, getting herself to her friend's house. And so the Let Grow project, which is the one that's the most popular in schools to date, is teachers sending their kids home with the homework assignment. It says, Mom, it says I have to do something by myself without you, or without an adult. And the parent who might have been like flinching, maybe not ready for that yet, sees that all the other parents of all the other kids in the school are doing that. Okay, Mom, everybody else is going to the ice cream shop. Okay, go. Mom, everybody's trying babysitting. Okay, I'll let you stay home alone.
Well, and the crazy thing is the babysitting thing. Babysitters used to be 14-year-old girls.
Or younger.
Yeah, or just your older sister. I mean, I used to watch my brother, and we were probably a little too young for this, but I was maybe 8 and he was 5 when my mom would just run for market, and you can't do that. I mean, we started about this. I was talking to a blue collar guy when I was a bouncer, and we were just talking. He was like, "I got to go home. I got to wake up." I was like, bro. He goes, "I got to take the kids to school, though." I was like, "The school's from your house. They're 8 and 10. And he goes, "It's not me. If it was me, I would let them walk." Their parents, and God forbid one of them. That's one of the things that I liked about in your book, where you got an email from an overprotective parent CCing the principal, and you just hit reply and just go, "Hey, I think this will be fine." And I think more people need to step up, because it reads those emails as it's everyone. You read one email and it's like, oh, everybody feels this way, or this person feels this way, and nobody feels the opposite way strongly enough to fight it.
Right.
And so it's like, I think the changing the minds, and it's just like, so it's like, this is something I'm curious about, because like, again, you wrote the Reason column with Jonathan, and it is, so these kids are growing up, and do you ever talk to their parents that regret raising them this way? Because I've heard case studies of the kids who resent the parents, but I've never heard the stories from the parents admitting some sort of fault.
That's interesting. Once in a while, I get letters from parents saying, I feel like I was a little too worried. Actually, I was just reviewing a letter recently because, in 2018, we got the first free-range kids law passed in Utah, which says it's not neglect to give your kids some independence, to take your eyes off your kids, sort of like your dad would let you guys, or whoever it was, your grandmother would let you babysit for a short while she ran out to the grocery, which seems totally fine, actually, to me. Especially the idea that you have to be absolutely perfect. I mean, like if there was one day and, she had to go to the grocery for something, or she had to run an errand, and she lets you stay home, God forbid that somebody should consider that terrible parenting or irresponsible, when it's just, parenting is never perfect. There's never a time that everything goes absolutely according to plan. And to not recognize that is to not recognize reality and just demonize parents for being on this world that is not always perfect. But in any event, one of the guys, when we were asking people in Utah to write to us, how does it feel now that you have a law that says it's not neglect to give your kids some reasonable independence? One dad said that he had been overprotective, and he was starting to see his kids, and I can't remember the exact ages, but I think it was like 11, 9, and younger, being very hesitant and sort of unsure of themselves. And he started to think maybe that had to do with him always walking them places, driving them places, watching over them, intervening if there was anything going wrong. And he said by hearing about the law change, he decided, well, maybe that was sort of a wake-up call for him. And between the law changing and worrying that his kids were sort of growing, the word is not weak. I think the word is not assured of their own competence, starting to be, I guess the word is anxious. Maybe that's it. Simple as that. One word answer. Seeing them growing anxious made him realize that there had to be some counterforce that says, yes, you can do it. And the counterforce is him saying, yes, you can do it. And so with the law on his side and the worrying about his own kids, he sent them out to do more on their own. And sure enough, and I'm not saying it's always A leads to B, the minute your kid runs an errand, they come back and they're ready to, take on the world. But there is something to never letting them do anything on their own. And the message that they're getting, which is that you don't believe that they can do it, or if anything goes wrong, you don't think that they'd be able to figure out how to get themselves out of it. And so you're always there. And the message does become to kids, my parents love me, but they, I'm not ready for it. They don't think I'm that capable.
Yeah. It's a weird thing because you run into, like I said, I run into people who anybody I know that does 401k, until they were in their 30s, they didn't understand that they could just invest in stocks. Like, that's something that you're not taught anywhere. You know what I mean? And it's just, and I think it leads to even further down. I see it like, this is something I thought was interesting. Agree with me. Products in grocery stores. Like the amount of things that are just like, here's a thing so you don't have to learn how to season chicken. Just toss it in this. And it's wait. If we're talking about Montreal chicken seasoning, I think we have to stop now because that stuff is a godsend. And the steak stuff, oh my God, you got the garlic, the salt, and the pepper all mixed together with, I don't know, thyme and rosemary. It's so good. Yeah, I mean, you could figure out your own. You could. I don't think it's the apotheosis of fecklessness. God, why am I using all these crazy words? I don't think you're a loser if you buy Montreal steak seasoning. Sure. I really don't. Sure, but if you buy Montreal steak seasoning because you're scared to figure out how to season a steak, then you might have an issue. You might, but I would say that the bar, like, what is it, the DSM, that book that all the psychologists use? Oh, yeah. I think it should be a little higher than buys Montreal steak seasoning, needs to see a shrink, or, start, get a stick and become a hobo so that they can assert their independence because they're so pathetic that they're buying Montreal steak seasoning. I didn't even learn about Montreal steak seasoning. My kids were Boy Scouts and they came home raving about it. And I'm learning about it right now, so maybe I'm being a hypocrite. Wait till I feel like this is sponsored by McCormick. One thing I wanted to ask you about. So you got the law passed in Utah. It wasn't just me, but yeah. Yeah, well, a law was passed. The organization and the movement got it passed. And the people in Utah were great. And Senator Lincoln Fillmore, what a great name, right? He sponsored it. He's got two presidential right there. Yeah, really, and we don't even know his middle name. Yeah, it's probably Jefferson. Harding. Yeah. Never. But I was going to ask you though, did that reverse legislation, or like, are you seeing this? Like, are you seeing an over or is this just when you hear about a cop picking up a kid with like wood or something like that, like a kid just, and your cops will go up to them and you bring them in a squad car, this and that, because of laws, or are they just using pressure? So we've just spent a lot of time and a lot of brain power, and not my brain, a woman named Diane Redleaf, who works with us as our legal consultant, trying to figure out what the laws are in all 50 states because, oh my God, we were going to do a map that just said sort of, green, yellow, red, green, it's a great state, yellow, I don't know, red. Now there's gray, there's stripes that go this way if the law is good, but the policy is bad. What if the policy is good in the Child Protective Services side, but the actual law for criminality is wrong? It is a mess. It is so confusing that even drawing the little key, it's like, okay, if it's gray with green, that means good, but not that good. And that means okay if you're, the cop calls on you, but not okay if a caseworker calls on you. It is extraordinarily confusing. And one of the things that people started saying to us is that I'd love to let my kid walk outside or play outside like you did back in the Gowanus days. I'm not afraid of them being kidnapped. I'm afraid of somebody calling a child abuse hotline and saying, look, there's this unsupervised kid out there. So what we want these laws to do is clarify things for parents. And the best way to clarify them is by saying,
neglect is gross, blatant disregard for a child's safety. Like when your grandmother leaves you and your 8-year-old, your 8 and your 5-year-old brother there, it's because she has to run an errand. That's not, I don't care. And it's not saying, here's some matches and heroin, have a great day.
Yeah.
It's not like, by the way, I've invited a couple bear cubs and their mother in, have fun. It'll be something for you to play with. It's just because she had to go somewhere and she trusted you and she knows you and she's leaving you with a phone, or she's leaving you with a phone number to call, hopefully both. It should be very clear that unless you're doing something that is truly statistically putting you in not just a little bit of danger because you could fall down, while you're drinking your milk, but in statistically likely danger of something significant, that's bad. And we do want people to, to not do that and for that to be against the law. But I don't want seat of your pants decisions, doing the best you can in this circumstance, to ever be mistaken for that. And so the laws that we're proposing, and we got a reasonable independence bill passed through the Colorado House with bipartisan support, one Democrat and one Republican, one white and one black. It was just so great supporting this law. And it passed unanimously through the House. And it was about to go to the Senate. And then along came COVID. And in South Carolina, the same thing. It was passed unanimously there through the Senate. It was about to go to the House. No more. Senate, nobody's meeting because of the pandemic. But I think the reason it has such widespread support once it gets introduced and so bipartisan is because everybody who's been a parent or a kid recognizes that it's better for the parents to be deciding when kids can do things, and it's better. The idea that somebody, a passerby with a phone, Miss Cratchit, knows better than me about my kid and my neighborhood and what my kid is capable of doing is crazy. So let's assume the best, give parents the benefit of the doubt. And if there's no way that they can prove that this is, not even that they can prove, there's no way that what they were doing was anywhere near normal or safe, okay, intervene. But until then, hands off. There are 7.8 million children will have a call made on them during the year at some point to a child abuse hotline. And do you know what percentage of African American children will be visited by Child Protective Services at some point in their childhood?
I mean, if my childhood says anything to you, it would be a significantly higher number, I would imagine. I'd imagine that's got to just partially be because in poor Black communities, they live in closer quarters. It's just a higher population density. And have busy bodies in the neighborhood, and but part of it is living under
surveillance. I mean, there's a lot of surveillance, and so can I tell you the percentage? Please?
Sure. I'm sorry.
Okay, the percentage of kids, Black kids, who are going to be, we have to interface with Child Protective Services at some point is 53%. So that's more than half. Yeah, it's crazy. So, and if of these 7.8 million calls that are made every year, 7.1 million are just thrown out. I mean, they have nothing to do with reality, whether, after a person has been checked out or even before they're checked out, that just seems like a crazy call or a pointless call. So that's too many people calling the hotline on too many kids and too much assumption that there's all this nefariousness going on and all this terrible parenting, and that children shouldn't have any freedom or independence at all, or that parents should always be with their kids. The famous case that we talk about a lot was Deborah Harrell, a single mom in South Carolina. Every day she goes to work in the summer at her McDonald's shift, and her daughter would come with her, 9 years old, and play on her computer while mom did her work. And then their computer was stolen from their house. And so the kid said, can I go to the park instead? And after a couple of days of her going to this very popular park, sprinklers, there's a breakfast distribution, there's lunch distribution, there's tons of kids and tons of adults. Some lady who's watching her says, where is your mother, little girl? And she's like, well, she's working. I can call her. I got my phone. And she's like, no. And the lady called 911, and Deborah was thrown in jail, and the kid was taken away. And in the end, there was a big enough hue and cry that they were reunited and everything turned out fine. But why should some lady saying, I don't think you should be here, trump the mother who says, this is a great place, it's close to me, she has communication with me, it's safe? A generation ago, nobody would have said, you as a 9-year-old playing in the park, that must be a terrible parent, let me get her thrown in jail. That just wouldn't have happened. So
And
we're
so-
trying
and
to
then
push
she-
back on that impulse. And if the impulse is not pushed back on, at least when somebody picks up the child abuse hotline and says, well, is the kid in distress? No. Does the mother know she's there? Yes. Is she fed? Yes. Is she clothed? Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much. Let her have a good day.
Is the idea to maybe train 911 this is all on one calls, because that's what people do instinctively. So just train 911 operators to transfer them or to diffuse the situation?
Well, I think you want to train 911 on what the new law will say, which is very clearly if the child is not in, blatant disregard for their danger. And I think a kid playing in a park with a lot of other kids and adults there is not in blatant danger, statistically not in danger. And so that's a simple thing that you could train anybody, a 911 operator or the caseworker, that like, look, thanks for calling. That kid sounds fine.
Yeah.
That doesn't rise to neglect.
I mean, that would be, I can't believe that's 50%.
53%. I know.
And then they got to worry about a person that's coming is sympathetic to life.
Their circumstances, right. And
Yeah.
sometimes Diane Redleaf, who I work with, who's worked in this field as I would say, a civil rights lawyer in a way for about almost 40 years now. A lot of times poverty is mistaken for neglect. I mean, one of the things that a caseworker is charged with doing when they come to the home is to look in the cabinets. Is there enough food? What's in the refrigerator? What drugs are the people, in the medicine cabinet? And first of all, that's a big intrusion if your kid was simply walking home alone, or 8 years old was, babysitting the 5-year-old while the mom ran to the grocery. And secondly, even say there's not enough groceries. What is the solution? Is the solution to help with groceries, or is the solution to send mom to jail or put her through a parenting class? It's like most of us know that everybody wants to eat food. And so if there's not enough food, let's think about the reasons for that, not that this is a neglectful mom.
You mentioned the COVID thing, and obviously there's nothing to do now without at least putting that lens on every situation and and I know early on you were talking about like there's obviously a paranoia about germs, and that's, there's still like light boxes for pacifiers now, UV boxes and all these crazy things. And I'm just wondering if you think that some of that stuff will get worse post COVID, and it does.
You mean
like some of the paranoia around children, like just with germs and just like the parenting. You don't want your kids out because now there's a reason to keep them close.
Right.
Home.
Although I bet you're seeing the opposite. I've been seeing the opposite. A lot of people I've spoken to have, which is that there are more kids out than there were in the previous generation. And I think the reason for that is that there's nothing else for them to do. They're not in Kumon, and they're not in lacrosse, and they're not at after school homework help. They're not at school. And so if you have kids at home literally all day, they wake up at 7, they're really energetic, they don't go to bed till 9, that's a long swath of time. And even if you wanted to be a hands-on parent, entertaining them and enriching them every single second, there's no way you could. And so kids are doing a lot more by themselves now. We did this gigantic survey of 1,600 kids, ages 8 to 13, across economic spectrum, across the country, regionally. And kids were just so much more independent than they've been before, if only because of time. And can I tell you my favorite story from this era, which I think illustrates a lot?
Yeah, of course.
Is that a yes? Okay, because I keep looking like I'm looking at you, but actually I'm just looking at the camera, so I couldn't even see if you were nodding, but you are nodding. Okay, so I was interviewing a mom in Virginia, and she said that her 7-year-old daughter, on a normal morning, first grade morning before COVID, every morning it was like waking her up. Come on, give her a name. I never remember this kid's name. Give her a name. Carolyn, come on, you got to get up. Come on, Carolyn, time to get up. And then back, Carolyn, you're still not up. Oh my God, we're going to be late. And so Carolyn drags herself out of bed. And meanwhile, mom is rushing downstairs and like, oh my God, Carolyn's taking so much time getting dressed. I'll put everything in her backpack for her. I'll pour out the cereal. I'll pour in the milk. Come on, Carolyn. Carolyn sits down, eats the food, and then is dashing out the door. Because if you don't get out the door at 7:27, then you're going to be at the back of the pickup line or the drop-off line, and it's going to take forever, and you're going to be late for work, and Carolyn's going to be late for school. Then there's another thing, because maybe she has to go to breakfast club or whatever. So there was no wiggle room. There was no wiggle room for Carolyn to do anything if she was going to keep being this slug, which she was. So then along comes COVID. people gradually change their routine. And by the time I was talking to the mom, which was probably April, maybe the beginning of May, this was the morning. In the morning, mom sleeps in, and Carolyn gets up because it's fun, because there's no, not going to be, doesn't have to run to school. She goes downstairs, she pours out her cereal, and she pours in the milk, and she eats it. Maybe she's even watching cartoons. God knows. Maybe it's CNN. I don't know what she's watching, but there she is eating. And then if she has a little extra time, which I guess she does every day, sometimes she then gets out a banana and the little yogurt, and then she gets out a couple pieces of bread and she toasts them for her mom, and then she butters them. And then she has breakfast ready for her mom when her mom comes in. And the reason this is a haunting story to me is because the toast butterer was inside Carolyn all the time. And it was a seed, right? Kids are seeds, but seeds need water to grow. And for children, free time is the water. And before COVID, there was no free time. We think of it as like paranoid parents, or they're helicoptering, or they're snow plowing. Part of it is that our schedules just didn't afford the time for her to pour out the cereal. Oh my God, she spilled. That's another 10 minutes. Now we're really behind the 8 ball. And so the gift of COVID, and I don't think it's a gift in most any other way, is this free-floating, free-form time that kids haven't had since I was a kid. I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't have anything to do in the summer, and I don't think that's happened for a generation or two. And so they're riding their bikes, they're drawing with chalk all over. I go outside now. This is a sort of hybrid thing. They're drawing in chalk about their Minecraft scores. So 2 things are going on at once, but it's like, I guess, is 1600 a big score or something like that? I guess it is. But they're cooking up a storm. There are so many pancakes being made, and those stores have yeast is gone. People are out of yeast and people are out of flour. And I think it's because, given a lot of time, you're getting bored, and then finally you have to do something. And one of the things the kids are doing, besides just the drawing and the biking, is helping out a lot more. When in our survey, and I don't have my numbers right in front of me, I don't think. No. Something like 70-something% of parents, and I think it was 78% of parents, said now their kids were helping out more around the house. And part of that's because the kids have nothing to do, and part of it's because they see their parents are working. And I guess part of it is just this boredom thing. It's more fun to wash the dishes than to go, what can I do? So I'd love to hear that. It's not all paranoid. Yeah.
Well, one thing, you just had the podcast that just came out, Supervision Not Required, and I know the first episode was just about playing alone, and even with like a lot of activities on your website, less toys, less this and that. Yeah. I kind of because I just caught myself doing it to a nephew, and I remember being mortified by this. When you're playing alone and you're pretending, there is nothing embarrassing than an adult repeating whatever nonsense you just said. And I caught myself doing it, and I have felt for 2 days about it. And that is that's how you learn creative imagination. And I love that you guys are kind of bringing that back. And that's the first episode of Supervision Not Required. That's kind of what you guys are centering on, right?
Yes.
I think anybody's listening to this, if you're interested in anything, you got to go check that out.
Hey, thank you.
And I know I caught myself doing it, and I instantly remembered my mom doing it to me and being so upset as a child. And it's super important, and it's how you learn to craft stories. And that's an important thing for any that's going to public speak as they get older, whether they're not a writer or not. You're going to need to talk to people. You're going to have be on job interviews. You need that ability together, and it's such a crazy thing. And I think that's awesome. And there's just we have some limitations with Zoom. But I do want to
cut us off.
I mean, we have a few minutes, but I do want to talk. So there are these generations of kids. Like, what would you say to like somebody who's 18, 20, who's realizing that maybe they live this way and they need to, do you think, what's the best way for people to change? Because I know you guys wrote a whole thing about the fragility of like what's going on with college students, whatever.
Right. Well, the idea of fragility is that you start to think, not that you actually are fragile, but if there's always been some adult there intervening, if you've always been, I'm at my summer place where when my older son, the non-subway rider, was 13, he was in a bowling league. And there were 9 teams in the league. And one day he brought home the trophy he'd gotten for 8th place, which is one of my favorite artifacts from this generation. And it's like, what an insult. I mean, 13, you know that you stink at bowling. Or if you want to get better at bowling, you better bowl some more because there are only 9 teams and you are number 8. And yet somehow the league felt compelled to give out trophies, unironic trophies, for 8 out of 9th place, which to me is a huge insult. And I think that's what we've been doing to a lot of you young people, if you're listening, is assuming that you can't roll with some punches, assuming that you can't recognize that you're not good at everything, that you are going to fall apart if you don't get that trophy, if you don't get that high five, if somebody doesn't say, well, it was a very good try. You know, who's that in Washington crossing the Delaware? That looks like my teacher. No, actually, that's Washington. It's from 200 years ago, but that was a good guess. So you've been raised with some adults assuming incorrectly that somehow they could handle whatever life threw at them and being outside and coming up with something fun to do and getting lost and falling off their bike, but you can't. And so the way to reverse this is to just start taking back some of that independence. I mean, it's as simple as, gee, this is hard to deal with. I guess I will. There's a mouse in the room. Do I call my dad or do I go to the hardware store and look up mouse traps? I got a bad grade. I guess I'll go and talk to the professor about what I can do better. Or even if you want to go and argue and say, that was an essay question and my essay was great, advocate for yourself. And the advocating for yourself sometimes sounds like you're just taking on the parental role of my child can do no wrong. But what you're really doing is trying to figure out your way in the world without somebody else interceding on your behalf. So it's almost a question of saying, thanks, mom or dad, I'm going to handle this, or not mentioning what's going on. And I'm not talking about serious mental problems that obviously need to be discussed if something is going terribly wrong. But the everyday give and take of getting a parking ticket and paying for it, you know, it's up to you. You can take that on and you'll feel better when you do. I mean, you will feel, this is a generation that's sort of racked by anxiety. Part of anxiety is feeling like everything is too much for me. I can't handle it. If you force yourself through, you can. So, and also brag to me. Brag to Let Grow. Go on Let Grow's Facebook page or go to letgrow.org and tell us these stories because you can be inspiring other young people to do the same thing. You know, we need some of these good stories, not just the stories of kids falling apart. Say, look, I did this. I thought I couldn't handle it and I did. And believe me, I'm happy to share those with Chris or with any other podcast that I'm on or with the Let Grow audience itself. So don't hide your light under a barrel.
All right, that's awesome. And I want to tell anybody listening to this, go to it's at Free Range Kids. That's you on Twitter. Oh
yeah, on Twitter it's still I'm Free Range Kids, but Let Grow has its own Let Grow org, like for organization. Okay. And then online it's Let Grow, not Let It Grow, not Let's Grow. letgrow.org is our website and also the name of our Twitter feed, Let Grow org.
And all the stuff you guys are doing is amazing. Thanks for talking to me. I really had a great time. I really doing great work, and it's really commendable, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate this interview. It's certainly the most energetic I've done, I'd say, all summer. So thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.